Throughout the 1760s and the early part of the 1770s, the British Empire had a bit of a problem on its hand. There were some rather unruly colonists in the American colonies that had been causing some problems. After a series of oppressive taxes and lack of representation, there was a lot of tension and really bordering on outright rebellion right here in this area. And you'd had some things that had happened, like the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party. There were several other things where there were clashes between the colonists and the British government here in this area. And the pressure just kept building and building and building until it eventually was all going to burst right here at this spot in Lexington, Massachusetts. As you come into the city center of Lexington, you are greeted by this statue. It is a colonial militiaman, and you can see he is patiently waiting, and he's got his eyes faced forward. He's cool and he's calm and he's collected. He has his musket at the ready, hammer is cocked, finger is on the trigger. And he has had enough. Now, if we're talking about sacred places in regards to American history, well, this has to rank as one of the top. This is Lexington Green, also known as Battle Green, and it is right here where the first shots of the American Revolution are going to be fired. This is where the American colonials finally said that they had had enough. So anyway, we're going to spend a little bit of time exploring this area. But first, it'd probably be good to get some context as to what happened leading up to the Battle of Lexington. Well, by 1774, the British government had really had just about enough of the shenanigans by these unruly American colonists. So they placed a guy by the name of Thomas Gage as the governor of the Massachusetts colony. And Gage was charged with putting down this rebellion. Gage had had about enough of it as well. By 1775, Gage was facing a full-on rebellion here in the colonies. So when he finds out that the colonials have weapons and powder stored in Concord, well, he is going to deploy 700 British troops under the command of a guy named Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith to march out to Concord, find these weapons and destroy them, and also track down a couple of troublemakers named John Hancock and Samuel Adams and arrest them. Right now I am facing east towards Boston, and as the British were advancing towards Concord, of course they were going to come through Lexington, and what they didn't know is that on the evening of April 18th and into the early morning hours of April 19th of 1775, well, Paul Revere and other men had already made their way through the countryside announcing that these British regulars were on the way. Now, some people say that Paul Revere said the British are coming, the British are coming. Probably not true, because at that time, everyone is British. They were all British subjects. Probably said either the redcoats are coming or maybe the lobsterbacks are coming. I've seen different things. But here in Lexington, when that call goes out, a lot of these militiamen end up gathering right here at Buckman Tavern. All right, so we're going to go in and take a look at where the men around Lexington gathered up prior to the battle. Okay, so we just got in here into Buckman Tavern, and this has been transformed into a museum. So we're going to take a quick look around here and then head back out to Lexington Green. So right off the bat, when you walk in here, holy smokes, the artifacts that they have are next level. So this right here, what we were looking at on the left, is a waistcoat that was worn by John Hancock on the evening of April 18th of 1775. So him and Sam Adams were staying at a place called the Clark Parsonage, which isn't too far from here. Unfortunately, it's closed today, so I can't go inside there. But anyway, he liked elegant clothing, and the silk waistcoat was kind of a basically displaying his wealth and success. But yeah, that is pretty cool. And then also they have this cocked hat and this musket that belonged to a guy named Hammond Reed. He was in Captain Parker's company and was wearing this hat and using this musket during the Battle of Lexington. So again, I just can't believe some of the stuff that they have in here just in the first room. This is a drum that belonged to William Diamond. He was about 19 years old, and it was on this drum that he beat the call to arms on the morning of April 19th in 1775. And then if you look here, you can see, well, there's some art and decoration there that was added in 1875. And they just have all kinds of fascinating items here. Here you can see a musket ball that was recovered. This is a tobacco box that belonged to Caleb Harrington. He was one of the men who was killed in the Battle of Lexington. And then if we look here, well, this is a powder horn that belonged to Jonathan Harrington. He was 16 years old and was Captain Parker's fifer. And he stood on the common with this powder horn right here. And he was also the last survivor of the Battle of Lexington and survived long enough to have his photo taken. Dang, this is so stinking fascinating. Okay, this room that we are in right now is the Buckman kitchen. So right here is where the owner of this establishment would have had his office. And there are all kinds of different, cooking utensils here and different things like that. But what I like most is walking across this old floor. There's something about the sound of a creaking floor that is just cool to me. All right, we're moving through and entering into the West Room here at the Buckman Tavern. So you can see a little bit more of an open space here. So a lot of people in the town met here in this room. As a matter of fact, 4 months before the battle, they met in this very place and secured an order for bayonets. Okay, so people were kind of getting geared up and ready in case something happened. And they also have this replica trunk here. Oh, and listen to that sound. There's that sound again. I love that. Such a historic creak. But this is a replica of the trunk that Paul Revere and John Hancock's secretary, John Lowell, removed. Hancock had a bunch of papers that he was storing here in the tavern and had it in a crate like this one, or a trunk like this one. But when the British regulars were closing in on Lexington, well, obviously he didn't want it to fall into their hands. So, yeah, they got it out of here in a hurry. All right, just made our way into what might be the most famous room in all of Lexington. This is the tap room of Buckman's Tavern. So you can just imagine being in here, maybe in a crowded room, probably would have smelled like sweat and maybe ale or beer or things like that. And you would have had all of these people from the area of Lexington coming in here in the early morning hours of April 19th to basically get ready. This was their headquarters. They were getting ready for the British regulars who were about ready to come into town. And there would have been a whole variety of people, young people, old people. There would have been like farmers and blacksmiths and apprentices and slaves, all of them getting ready to take up arms against the British regulars. All right, one more thing that I want to show before we go back out to Lexington Green. What we are looking at here, you can see it's covered in this protective, plexiglass. This is the original door to the Buckman Tavern. And take a look here. Down here at the base, well, there is a bullet hole in the door from the Battle of Lexington. How crazy is that? All right, just stepped out of Buckman's Tavern, and while I was in there, I thought it was only appropriate to get a little bit of John Buckman's root beer. One thing that I like about traveling to these historic spots, like Buckman Tavern here, is that I'm always learning something new. And here is something that I just learned. Here is a plaque that is placed in honor of Prince Estabrook. It says here that he was a slave who lived in Lexington, and at dawn on April 19th, 1775, he was one of the Lexington militiamen who was awaiting the arrival of the British regulars right here at Buckman Tavern. He was actually wounded out here on Lexington Green in the fight that was to follow. And says here, through circumstance and destiny, he thus became the first black soldier to fight in the American Revolution. I really like that they have this here because this is somebody that I never knew about. So here is a slave who is going to be fighting for America's independence, and through his service and through his sacrifice, well, he is going to be laying the groundwork for the freedom that would come to his descendants. That is pretty amazing. All right, we've moved back out to the Battle Green, and of course things don't look exactly the same here as they did in 1775. This stone marker marks the spot where an old meeting house would have been during the Revolutionary War years. So in 1775, if we would have been standing here, well, there would have been an old meeting house right here in this very spot. And during the Revolution, well, they stored weapons and gunpowder here at this place as well. But it's right out here on Lexington Green where the whole American Revolution is going to start. So imagine that it is the early morning hours of April 19th, 1775, about 5 a.m. in the morning. And you are one of about 70 militiamen right here on the green here in Lexington. And you are about to square off against a detachment of the most powerful military in the world. I can't even imagine what it must have felt like for these guys. So again, they're 70 and they've got 700 who are bearing down on them, and they are being led by a veteran of the French and Indian War named John Parker. John Parker was 46 years old. He was actually dying of tuberculosis. And it's said that he said to these other men, "Stand your ground. Do not fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." So again, just imagine the scene here on the morning of April 19th, 1775, where somewhere out here in this general vicinity, you have Captain John Parker and 70 patriots who are squaring off against the British. And when it was obvious, that they were vastly outnumbered. The story goes, there's a little bit of confusion as to what actually happened, but the story goes that John Parker ordered his men to fall back, and we don't know who it was, but somebody squeezed the trigger and fired a shot, and you have these nervous British soldiers that end up unloading a volley on these militiamen, and killing 7 and mortally wounding another. So there were 8 who were killed here at the Battle of Lexington. And there's a monument here that was erected in memory of those soldiers and of this battle. And I'm just going to read this. It says, "Sacred to liberty and rights and the rights of mankind, the freedom and independence of America, sealed and defended with the blood of her sons. This monument is erected by the inhabitants of Lexington under the patronage and at the expense of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to the memory of their fellow citizens, Ensign Robert Monroe, Jonas Parker, Samuel Hadley, Jonathan Harrington, Isaac Muzzy, Caleb Harrington, and John Brown of Lexington, and Asahel Porter of Woburn, who fell on this field the first victims of the sword of British tyranny and oppression on the morning of the ever memorable 19th of April, Anno Domini 1775. The die was cast," and then they have some exclamation points behind it. It says, "The blood of these martyrs in the cause of God and their country was the cement of the union of these states, then colonies, and gave spring to the spirit, firmness, and resolution of their fellow citizens. They rose as one man to revenge their brethren's blood, and at the point of the sword to assert and defend their native rights. They nobly dared to be free. The contest was long, bloody, and affecting. Righteous heaven approved the solemn appeal. Victory crowned their arms, and the peace, liberty, and independence of the United States was their glorious reward." And right here, beneath this monument, or rather at the foot of this monument, are the buried remains of those 8 men who were the first to die in the American Revolution. They were in the Olde Cemetery, and then on April 20th, 1835, they were brought here and reburied within the railing of this monument. Man, that is something else. All right, now I don't have just a ton of time to spend here, but before we left Lexington, wanted to take a quick stop here at Ye Olde Burying Ground, which is the final resting place of a lot of patriots who fought in the Revolution and in Lexington. As you were moving through the burial ground here, well, sometimes you'll see one of these markers. This is from the Sons of the American Revolution, so it makes it real easy to find the graves of the ones who served in the American Revolution. And this is the final resting place of Isaac Hastings. It says, one of the patriots who resisted the British forces on Lexington Common on the 19th of April, 1775. And then he died July 2nd of 1830 at the age of 75. Boy, I'll bet he had some stories. Here's another man that I'm sure had some stories. This is erected in memory of Captain Jacob Priest, and says that he died in 1821 and was another veteran of the American Revolution. As you make your way through the cemetery, well, naturally, being at the heart of the American Revolution, you're going to see a lot of graves with American flags. Again, denoting, in many cases, people who fought in the American Revolution. But there is one notable exception. If you look right here, well, we got a couple of British flags. This is the grave of a British soldier who was wounded on April 19th at the Battle of Lexington and died in Buckman Tavern a few days later on April 22nd of 1775. And we don't know his name. We just know that he rests right here in Ye Olde Cemetery here in Lexington. So to all of my British friends, we don't want to be too hard on you. So we are caring for the graves of even the British soldiers who died here in the American Revolution. Even though I am short on time and really need to be getting down the road, well, I can't come here without visiting and paying respects to John Parker. Here it says, to the memory of Captain John Parker, born July 13th, 1729, commander of the Minutemen, April 19th, 1775, died September, I think that's 17th, 1775. As I mentioned earlier, he had tuberculosis. So even though John Parker was there right from the very beginning, he would not live long enough to see the fruits of his labors. But yeah, pretty amazing to be able to visit this grave. All right, well, there you go. Right here is where it all began with the 8-year war that would be the American Revolution. But the events of April 19th were not over yet. The British still had a job to do. So after the skirmish right here in Lexington, they went on the march and were headed to Concord, which is where we are going to be heading right now.